Welcome to Kibbe on Liberty. Welcome to Kibbe on Liberty. My name is Matt Kibbe, as you may know, and I want to do something a little bit different today. We are exactly 1 week out until the election. I'm recording this a day before we publish it, and I wanted to give you my take on the election and, more importantly, the interesting dynamics that should be an opportunity, should be a cause of optimism for libertarians. And I know that sounds a little bit crazy, so stick with me, and I will try to explain where I'm coming from. First, a bold prediction. I boldly predict that either Donald Trump or Kamala Harris will be the winner of the election next Tuesday. And I say that facetiously because obviously one of them is going to win. But importantly, the two-party duopoly that I've talked about on this show endless amounts of time, and I've had so many guests talking about this as well, they have successfully choked off any attempt at diversity, any attempt at real market competition in the political process, and we have exhaustively documented all those reasons. But I think, and I'll get back into this hopefully in a little bit, but I think the experience of RFK Jr. being lawfared out of the election as an independent is a good indication that third parties are just not going to perform that well as long as the two parties set the rules of the game. And I also think that Chase Oliver, the Libertarian candidate, is not going to do that well in this cycle. I know that upsets people that I say that, but it's just a reality. There's a lot of reasons for that, and maybe I'll get into that as well. But I'm talking as if one of the two major party candidates is going to win this election, and what we as libertarians do in the context of that. Now, I have also spoken quite a bit about this long waited for, eagerly anticipated by me, it took way too long to get here, coalition that has emerged out of what I have been calling lockdown authoritarianism. I wanted that coalition to emerge the day after they started imposing lockdowns, the day after they did the stay-at-home orders, the day after they started doing vaccine mandates, and the day that CISA, part of Homeland Security, started telling you that you were essential or non-essential, the day that we discovered that the Department of Defense and Homeland Security and probably the CIA was sorting through your tweets and your Facebook posts to determine whether or not you were spreading misinformation about COVID, about vaccines, all that stuff. I wanted that libertarian uprising to happen the day it started, but it didn't. And you've heard me ranting about this for the longest time. It didn't happen, but along the way, I think a lot of people, including people that were perhaps open to some of those measures as an emergency, have discovered that the government and all of these agencies and this entire ecosystem that I call the pandemic industrial complex is profoundly antithetical to the American experiment, anti-freedom, anti-human dignity, anti-democracy, anti-fill in the blank, anything that we cherish as Americans. They violated all of those principles. And out of that has come this beautiful anti-authoritarian coalition. Some of us libertarians, many of us libertarians have been there for quite some time. Not all of us, but many of us. But more importantly, you're seeing a lot of really interesting, important, influential voices coming from the former left, people that thought that liberalism actually meant liberalism, when in fact it turns out, particularly in today's Democratic Party, that liberalism means the opposite of that. It means authoritarianism. It means do as you're told. It means speak when spoken to. It means get in line. And I think a lot of people have been red-pilled and discovered that, you know what, that's not what I thought it was. And from this comes the new resistance, as they call themselves, the MAHA movement. There's any other number of monikers, people that come from self-identified from the left and by the way, people from the right as well. But I want to focus a little bit on the left because I think it's an interesting dynamic. One of these guys, Elon Musk, openly describes himself this way. Another one of these guys, RFK Jr., you probably know the list. There's a bunch of other tech bros that maybe you don't know that were former Democrats or at least formerly agnostic about politics that are reacting to some of the more insane strictures of the Biden-Harris administration. Tulsi Gabbard Jr. Oh, Tulsi Gabbard Jr., that's funny. She is not a junior. RFK is a junior. And a bunch of Bret Weinstein, another really interesting influencer who was originally canceled by the woke left and suddenly realized that he was part of a community that wanted authoritarianism more than they wanted freedom of speech. But I've also documented a lot of these comedians that I think were on the tip of the spear, the cutting edge of this. Russell Brand, Rob Schneider, who's been on this show, Dave Chappelle, a number of these guys. I guess Kill Tony now falls in that category. The much demonized and perhaps purposely misunderstood Kill Tony. Even Bill Maher is someone who I used to spar with back in my Tea Party days. I would go on a show, and he loved to set me up for failure by arguing out of the block that the only reason I was angry about Barack Obama was because he was a black man. And today, that maybe that Bill Maher still exists, but today he has been willing to push against COVID authoritarianism. He's been willing to push against the speech police. And even recently, he's been not willing to demonize Elon Musk now that Elon Musk is not on the appropriate team. So you have this coalition emerging, and these are disaffected political operatives from the Democratic Party. Both RFK Jr. and Tulsi Gabbard were demonized and literally choked off by the Democratic machine. Maybe we'll talk about that more in a second. Comedians who were censored or just reacted to the idea that they couldn't speak their mind. Jimmy Dore is a great example of someone that realized that he wasn't allowed to question vaccine efficacy and was demonized for it and censored and on and on and on. So this coalition has emerged, and they would argue that they are independent of the Trump campaign, independent of Trump winning re-election. They've all sort of gathered behind him at this point, starting with RFK, and that brought an onslaught of other people. I should mention Nicole Shanahan, who was his vice presidential candidate, a very influential philanthropist on the left, who is also having a red pill moment. She's, I would argue, in some ways, the intellectual leader of the Make America Healthy Again movement. Hell hath no fury like a Democrat scorned, and she has been producing some really interesting ads under the MAHA banner that is, again, quite fascinating. So you have this anti-authoritarian movement, and think about where they're at. You know, they're coming from the left. They're coming from a position of perhaps thinking that the government and government programs and government authority can be channeled for good purposes, and you know, maybe it just got off the rails, and maybe it's corporate captured, as RFK Jr. talks about all the time. But I think they're also starting to realize, defined by the issues that they care about, that government is fundamentally a corrupting force that is undermining almost everything they care about. And think about the things I talked about during lockdown authoritarianism. Make America Healthy Again probably has its roots in skepticism about the vaccine that was created from the top down, imposed from the top down, sidelined around the regulations from the top down. And when people started talking about adverse side effects, they were censored, they were silenced, they were demonized, they were literally deplatformed. But it goes much deeper than that, and I think the MAHA coalition has an opportunity to learn a lot from someone like Thomas Massie, who's a regular guest on this show. They have a lot to learn about how it is that the food industrial complex has captured the regulatory process, the Department of Agriculture, USDA, even the FDA, and that entire ecosystem of agencies that likes to tell us what healthy is and what healthy isn't. This is not a new problem. The corruption of the food pyramid by big sugar and processed food has been documented on this show for years. The corruption of meat processing has been documented by Thomas Massie, who has a actual legislation called the Prime Act that would decentralize and cut these massive foreign-owned companies from Brazil and China not out of the process, but give them real competition, local competition, bottom-up competition. And my good friend Joel Salatin has been on this show explaining why that is, that competition and localism and actually knowing the farmer and knowing where your beef comes from actually enhances safety and makes our system more robust and less unsafe. Because a centralized hamburger comes from any number of different farms, different processors, different cattle. You don't know where it's from, what it is. So how would you know if it's safe or not? But if you know the guy down the street and you know that he's been providing beef for your community for decades, if not generations, you have some sense that that's a good thing. So food freedom is not just about better regulations of mega corporations that may be in fact feeding us a lot of bad food. It's about market accountability. It's about localism. It's about competition. And it's about consumers making informed choices instead of the USDA telling you, this is the food pyramid, this is what you must do. We're not going to tell you that this food pyramid has been captured by corporate interests that wants you to consume more processed carbohydrates and less fat, less meat, less things that we now think are perhaps more healthy for you. And it has nothing to do with science. It has nothing to do with the best choices you could make for your family. It has everything to do with big money that has captured the regulatory process. This, of course, is a libertarian principle that comes from public choice economics. Regulatory capture is a fundamental problem with top-down regulations that tell us how to live and what to do, what we can and can't take, all that stuff. And that is a good thing to teach MAHA folks that are looking to fix this stuff. Another great example, there's been a lot of talk now about high fructose corn syrup. Where does high fructose corn and what it does to your body and how it is contributing to our obesity epidemic in this country? Where does that stuff come from? High fructose corn syrup is explicitly, almost wholeheartedly, a product of government corruption and government regulation that starts with massive sugar subsidies primarily in the state of Florida, something that I was intimately involved with trying to unwind many years ago before any of you were born. When I worked for a congressman from Florida, we tried to repeal the sugar program, which raises the cost of refined sugar and allows for corn subsidies, again, another government program, to make high fructose corn syrup economically feasible. Wouldn't happen if we didn't prop up the sugar program, if we didn't prop up the corn program. MAHA needs to know this, and they need to unwind those programs. They need to get the government out of the way so that, again, people can make better choices and hold their producers of food more accountable. Another issue is lockdown authoritarianism itself. And I want to talk about this. This is probably a red pill moment for a lot of people, where we realized that in a lot of ways our economy has been militarized. And what do I mean by that? There's this backwater agency at the Department of Homeland Security called CISA, and I forget what it stands for. It's cybersecurity kind of thing, that was actually in charge of coming up with a plan, economic plan, to respond to a pandemic. That's central planning defined. it is a military takeover of what is other, for all of its flaws. We have a market economy that allows for a modicum of competition and pricing and people choosing where they should work. All that stuff, all that beautiful stuff we talk about. I have exciting news. Our latest documentary, The Free Life, Portrait of an Artist, a project that we've been working on for several years here at Free the People, is finally available to view. This is a story of my friend Carlos Luna, an artist who had to flee communist Cuba in order to create the beautiful things that he does now in Miami, Florida. His grandmother actually told him, "You must leave if you want to create your art." It's a beautiful story. It's a hero's journey. And you have an opportunity now to see it for the very first time. Go to watch.freethepeople.org. It's $9.99. This is the first time you'll be able to see it. We've been showing it at film festivals. We've been winning awards. Now you have your chance. I'm eager to hear what you think about it. So check it out. Watch.freethepeople.org. Well, during lockdowns, we replaced all that with a central plan. And this agency that you've never heard of, CISA, was literally deciding whether or not you, as a worker, was essential or non-essential. Think about the blackboard. Think about the craziness of some gray-suited Soviet bureaucrat deciding whether or not your job was essential and wondering, like, how on earth could they know in a wildly complex economy what's essential and what's not? I think the other red pill moment for me was discovering that the Venn diagram of the censorship industrial complex, all of these agencies that were exposed by the Twitter files as to determining what was appropriate speech, what was disinformation. They literally had bureaucrats deciding whether or not Bob with 300 followers was allowed to tell a joke about Biden, was allowed to tell a joke about vaccine efficacy. God forbid that you talked about masks. You weren't allowed to do it. They took down YouTube took down our best performing Ron Paul video where he early on raised what is now obvious skepticism about masks as a physician. He knew early on. But that Venn diagram between the censorship industrial complex exposed by the Twitter files and the military industrial complex, it is the same group to a person. Now, there's nonprofits with all sorts of fancy names like the Stanford Internet Observatory, which happily has been shut down, thanks to our friend Jay Bhattacharya exposing it. But different names, but the same groups. And what you saw in the Twitter files was a number of these same agencies that have militarized the economy, that have militarized once free speech, determining what is information and disinformation. All of that is the same thing. And I think that attracts the attention of a lot of always powerful voices coming from the left, like Jimmy Dore, who is skeptical of military intervention, skeptical of endless wars. I think that element of this, of which Trump has elements of that as well, skepticism of our role in Ukraine, raising the question of whether or not Iraq was a disaster, the way that we pulled out of Afghanistan, on and on and on. These critics of interventionism are reminding, I think, a lot of constitutional conservatives what it was that they stood for. And this is a ramble tangent, but relevant to this. If you actually care about spending, if you care about the size of government, if you care about government power intruding on your lives, you have to look at endless wars. You have to look at the military-industrial complex and how it has invaded all aspects of American life. If you're a fiscal conservative, you have to wonder about the black hole of fully funding the war on terror. You've heard this coming primarily out of the mouths of Republicans, but now out of Democrats as well. Everybody has to make sure that we fully fund the war on terror. Well, guess what? That is an infinitely black hole. We can't afford it. And one of the really interesting things that's happening is Elon Musk is talking about efficiency. I think he's going to discover, should he get the opportunity to take on government efficiency, that there are whole departments, whole chunks of the U.S. government that are fundamentally inefficient and fundamentally undermine American values, fundamentally undermine the goal of fiscal responsibility. If you're worried about the debt, if you're worried about the government spending so much money it doesn't have, that it can't tax anymore, it can't borrow anymore, it has to just print dollars out of the Federal Reserve. If you're worried about that stuff, and you should be, you have to deal with the fact that we're in too many wars, we're in too many places, we're causing too much chaos, and something has to be done about that. You cannot balance the budget. You cannot tackle the debt. You cannot deal with the new authoritarianism coming from the left and elements of the nationalist right unless you deal with our foreign policy. I think that was there before, but I think the lockdown authoritarianism and the discovery that many of these elements of the intelligence and defense communities were at the center of that is a real revelation for a lot of people. I've already talked about speech censorship, and this is what's interesting about a lot of these comedians. That the comedic mind is inherently wanting to say something that they're not allowed to say in polite company. This is actually the process that comedians serve in a civil society, allowing us to talk about things that we're not otherwise allowed to talk about, dealing with the most complex issues of race and sex, whatever makes you the most angry about everything. We really need a comedian to start that conversation so that Americans from different perspectives can actually start talking about these things. And a lot of these comedians, if you're an actual comedian who actually believes this kind of stuff, and you probably aren't a good comedian if you don't believe these things, because you're not actually doing what comedians are supposed to do. You're starting to realize that this woke culture, this speech censorship, is fundamentally anathema to everything you believe in. And I forget if I mentioned Joe Rogan. I don't think I have so far, but obviously Joe Rogan started off as a comedian that just wanted to have conversations. And he has platformed endless numbers of comedians on his show. It's a big part of the reason why he is the absolute monster that he is today. Our own Dave Smith, the Libertarian comedian, is part of that community as well, and he's been a pretty powerful voice on a lot of these issues that I've already talked about. But comedians are coming around and realizing that the left authoritarianism is not the same thing that they signed up for. Even Dave Chappelle, go back and watch his Saturday Night Live skit, which apparently was not approved and not pre-screened, and he pulled a fast one on the censors at SNL. His take on Donald Trump is one of the most intelligent, thoughtful, and realistic takes explaining the power of Trump that I've ever seen. Calls him an honest liar. And the bit that I love the best is when he points out when he's debating Hillary Clinton, and Hillary Clinton accuses him of taking advantage of the tax code. And Trump says, well, of course I do. Why wouldn't I? But you're not going to do anything about it, Hillary, Barack Obama, the Democratic Party, because all of your rich donors have rigged the system to benefit themselves at the expense of the American people. That's pretty powerful stuff, and that's coming from Dave Chappelle, who by any measure would not be considered a right-winger. If anything, he's been critical of the right since his start. So you have this dynamic of comedians. I've had Rob Schneider on the show, and he talks eloquently. If you want to go back and go towards the end of the episode that I did with Rob, he talks quite eloquently about the social function that good comedy has in terms of getting Americans to better appreciate, tolerate, God forbid, even respect people from different perspectives just by having a conversation. We need more speech. We need more comedy. We need more jokes. We even need more jokes about the corrupt government system of waste disposal in Puerto Rico. Google that sometime. If you're angry about it, Google it and discover that this is a real problem that every Puerto Rican American knows all about. Maybe it's one of the reasons they fled the country to come to the U.S. in the first place. Who knows? Cult of wokeness is something that we haven't done as much as other groups. It's something that a lot of conservatives talk about quite a bit. But we have a series called Cult of Wokeness, more from a libertarian perspective, because again, like in probably what I'm talking about, cancel culture is part and parcel of wokeness, but more fundamentally, intersectionality is this idea that contra Martin Luther King, who taught us judge people based on the content of their character and not the color of their skin, the intersectionality matrix is all about judging people based on the color of their skin, their sexual preferences, their ethnicity, all the things that we Americans spent most of the last 200 years trying to get rid of. Now it's back. And from a libertarian perspective, I think we should be first out of the gate calling that out for what it is, and the fact that it undermines the vision of MLK and everything, hopefully, we value as people who believe in voluntary cooperation, not coercion. We believe in diversity, not mandated. I don't even know what to call it. Like, diversity to me is the realization that each of us has a special place in our communities, in our country, in our economy. We each have personal knowledge. We each have personal skills. We each have personal dreams. And the beauty of a market is all of those differences, all of that real diversity coming together and creating something bigger and more beautiful than any one of us could have done by ourselves. That's what we believe in. That's our philosophy, this beautiful, chaotic market process of people just figuring out how to make their dreams come true in an uncertain and radically unknown future. You need that sort of diversity. But now diversity has become a dirty word, because diversity is a mandated DEI kind of thing where you have to have one of these and one of these and one of these. That's not what it is. And that's corrosive to the very process of cooperation and mutual respect that we're all aspiring to get to as libertarians. One of the great things that happened during lockdowns was the reaction of parents to the education industrial complex. For years, we libertarians have been talking about how the education system is not good for students. It's definitely the worst for students in disadvantaged neighborhoods who have the crappiest government schools. It's not teaching them skills that they need. It's not providing for your personalized needs, depending on who you are as a child. And what, going back to what I was just saying, what are your personal skills? What are your personal dreams? What are your abilities? What do you want to do with your life? When's the last time you think a government school ever asked a child or their parents that question? Well, during lockdowns, a lot of parents who were forced to spend time at home with their children, maybe their job was unessential, non-essential, maybe they just had to not work because the government schools, which for better or worse were a daycare system for a lot of parents, they went home and discovered during Zoom schools that parents, that teachers don't teach, that the curriculum is mostly garbage, and that the process of government schooling is really just a prison-like indoctrination system that teaches young people how to comply, teaches them how to walk in a straight line. It teaches them to show up at this class and this class and this class, and it goes on all day. And a lot of them said, you know what? We're not going to do that here anymore. So they got together with their friends and their families and their neighborhoods and their communities and developed different styles of pod schooling, alternative schooling, homeschooling, call it whatever you want. And in that process, they discovered that they could actually ignite an interest in learning in their children that the government schools had never done. they discovered that they could sort of create in ecosphere in their community where the parents could share that burden and turn their kids on to ideas and their specific talents. And by the way, they also discovered that it doesn't take 6 or 8 hours, whatever the school day is. That group of parents, and I don't know what that number is. I think it's a massive number. That group of parents has become a voting bloc. And I went to a Moms for Liberty thing. We've had Tiffany Justice on the show, and she invited me to attend their big conference here in D.C. not that long ago. And I heard the same thing that I heard from Tea Party activists circa 2008, 2009, 2010. And they had shown up at Moms for Liberty, and they kept saying over and over again, I've never done this before, but I had to do something. That is a block of activists and voters and opinion leaders that is going to redefine politics and ultimately, I predict, as Corey DeAngelis has done on this show, that it's finally going to break the education industrial complex. It's finally going to trump the are we allowed to say Trump anymore? I don't think so, but it's going to trump the teachers union, who overplayed their hand. They didn't care about the kids. They didn't care about the kids' mental health, their physical health. They cared about themselves and this administrative state that they've created around education. These parents know these things now. So it's going to be a revolution in education. There's a number of states that are finally pushing through Republican roadblocks to reform in education. That's a really interesting thing. And I think one of the pillars of liberalism has been public education, as they call it. I think a lot of them are now discovering that public education is just another crony capitalist culture, maybe less capitalist, but certainly crony culture that only feeds the machine and it doesn't teach the kids. That's an exciting thing. So you have all these disparate communities coming together in an anti-authoritarian coalition, and we have a job as libertarians to be part of that for sure, but also to make sure that the answer to the abuse of government power isn't giving the government more power to fix the problem that they created. And I get the instinct. I think that mistake is made all the time. But it could also be an opportunity to reset the paradigm and start focusing more on, as Mike Lee might say, federalism. And I would take it a step further. I'm not a federalist so much as I am a localist. I want communities to have more power in everything from food to everything else. We just had Amy Lepore on. I'm amazed that I'm remembering everybody's name today, talking about Defend the Guard. Local communities can actually have an active impact on the foreign policy decisions we make by ensuring that state national guards are not diverted away from their proper local function so that we can go off and fight another endless war. It all gets back to localism. It all gets back to citizen power. It gets back to voluntary solutions that are about respecting each American for what they contribute to this beautiful, crazy quilt that we call a country. Regular viewers of Kibbe on Liberty already know how obsessed I have been with the pandemic industrial complex and all of the stupid, authoritarian, and downright evil things that the government did to us during COVID-19. Well, I'm proud to announce a new investigative series that looks to get to the bottom of all of that. It's called The Cover-Up, and I'm producing it in cooperation with BlazeTV. The only place you're going to see this is BlazeTV, so go to FauciCoverup.com/Kibbe and use the code FauciLied for $30 off your annual subscription. Do it now. The truth is out there. let's get back to the election and talk about let's talk about the elephant in the room. Let's talk about Donald Trump. I hope that I have not been misconstrued as to suggesting that somehow Donald Trump is having a full-on conversion to libertarianism. I don't think that's true. I don't think he would say that's true. I don't think that anyone that's lived through the last 8 years would think that suddenly Donald Trump has had a come to Jesus moment. I don't think that's true, but I do think that something interesting is happening. This started for me when RFK Jr. spoke at PorcFest this year, last year. When was that? Last year. And this will upset Logan, but I'm going to say it anyway. Terry and I went to see RFK Jr. speak at PorcFest, and I got to say it was the most libertarian speech that I've ever heard come from a politician that plausibly could become president. There was a pathway for that. Now, he was certainly pandering to us because we were in New Hampshire. We were at a libertarian gathering, the beautiful PorcFest that everybody who watches the show knows about. And I thought that was quite interesting. It started a bidding war. I interviewed Vivek Ramaswamy at PorcFest that same year, and he was also he said on my show that he used to be a libertarian, and that he has a lot of libertarian instincts. We sparred a little bit about that, particularly on things like the drug war, and he wanted people at PorcFest to know that he also appreciated the libertarian perspective. Fast forward to Donald Trump going to the Libertarian National Convention and making all sorts of promises to libertarians. You know, he promised to free Ross Ulbricht, which I think is essential. And by the way, freeing Ross Ulbricht is not just about freeing one guy that has been suffering in prison for far too long for things that I don't even believe were crimes. It's about this broader question of whether or not we have freedom on the internet, whether or not we can use encrypted means to protect us from government censorship, whether or not we're going to replace cryptocurrency with a central bank cryptocurrency. These are all issues. This is why Ross is being made an example of. He was the canary in the coal mine that proved that free people using technology could circumvent government intervention. So freeing Ross is a big deal. And if Donald Trump keeps that promise, that's a big deal. He also promised to put a libertarian in his administration, a big L libertarian. We'll see if he keeps that promise. He has promised to the tech bro community, to the point about Ross, that he will stop a central bank digital currency, that he will make sure that politicians like Elizabeth Warren don't go after cryptocurrency. She's just dying. She and Hillary Clinton, if you want to know where you stand on cryptocurrency, just realize that Elizabeth Warren and Hillary Clinton are all against it. It's all you need to know. You don't need to understand the technology. You don't need to understand the Austrian economics on the evolution of money. You don't need to know any of that stuff. You just need to know who the enemies of crypto freedom are to know what that is. And Trump has made big claims on that. And there's other things as well. Now, will he keep those promises? I think that's up to us. I think that's up to everything I've been talking about in this conversation so far. What matters more than the day before the election is the day after the election. Have we actually created a cultural environment where politicians feel the need to pander to libertarian values, feel the need that if they actually say something or do something libertarian, that there's going to be grassroots support for that? We need to build a coalition that is with us on these things. The MAHA coalition, the Anti-authoritarian coalition, the resistance, all of this beautiful chaos that's coming together. We need to be part of that. And I think one of the lessons I've learned as someone that's tried very hard, I'm a recovering political activist. I've tried when I was a Tea Party activist to have the Tea Party be that voice of reason within the Republican Party. Terry and I did a super PAC, presidential super PAC for Rand Paul. We did another super PAC for Gary Johnson when he was running for president after Rand Paul pulled out of the presidential race. But I don't think it's about politics. I think what matters most is whether or not we have been driving the cultural narrative in a pro-freedom way, in a way that sort of exemplifies these American values, in a way that has reasonable and thoughtful and doable policy solutions that can be embraced as an alternative to this ugly monster that our government has become. That's where we need to be. And I think that regardless of who wins in this election, that political realignment that's happening, we need to be part of that. We need to be part of a coalition. I've sort of given up on the perfect libertarian, majoritarian movement in this country. I don't think that's a thing. But I think most Americans have some, if not many, libertarian instincts. If we can support those, if we can turn people on to those things, you know, those crazy values like your mom told you, don't hurt people and don't take your stuff. I have yet to find a single person that disagrees with me when I say that. They could come from the far left, they could come from the far right, they come from all over the place, they come from Thanksgiving dinner tables. It's the one thing that I can say as a libertarian that divides no one. And that's our job as libertarians. I'm going to be talking a lot more about this. I don't know what's going to happen in this election. I have personal predictions. I am not going to endorse anybody because I don't think it's my job to tell you what to think and what to do. You go vote however it is you want to vote. Vote your conscience, vote your heart. Don't vote if you think voting is irrational. That's up to you. But I do know that if you're watching this show, you probably care enough about these values that we together can take responsibility to make sure that our country stays on the right track, gets on the right, I shouldn't say stay on the right track, we're on the wrong track, gets on the right track. There's an opportunity to do that, and let's not lose the forest for the trees. Did I say that right? I did, yeah. I got thumbs up from my producer. So enough. I'm done. I've talked a lot more than I thought I would. And let me just say as a follow-up, if we know who wins the day after the election, I've invited my good friend Jack Hunter, who also comes at this from a liberty perspective. He knows a lot more about politics than I do, to come on the show and sort of analyze what happened. You know, will the Republicans take the Senate? Will they hold the House? Who is in the White House? And I hope that we can do that the day after the election. I probably won't do it if we don't know what happened in the election. And a final thought about the ridiculousness of endless voting. So many systems in the states are now set up that we're not going to know necessarily who wins on election day. I think that's a disaster. I think that's a recipe for social unrest. It's a recipe for corruption and cheating, and it's going to tear our country apart. Hopefully we know. And if we know, we're going to look at it from a libertarian's perspective and figure out where we go next on values, on issues, on influencing the culture. That's what we at Free the People do. That's what we're going to continue to do. And I hope that you will continue to consume our work and check us out and be part of this beautiful chaos that we call liberty. Thank you. Thanks for watching. If you liked the conversation, make sure to like the video, subscribe, and also ring the bell for notifications. And if you want to know more about Free the People, go to freethepeople.org.